It's going to offer a bunch of amendments. Sometimes people call it a Christmas tree, so just hang things on the bill, and then it'll die under its own weight. It'll take up a lot of time. People will get upset. The whole deals made could fall apart. That is a strategy behind a lot of amendments.
There are a number of strategies that can be employed when working with this deadline. But as long as the last bill is introduced on the floor by 4:59 p.m. on cutoff day, debate can go on as long as needed. This final bill is lovingly referred to as the 5 o'clock bill.
If it's a big controversy, but like the 5 o'clock bill, they'll probably gavel in, say we're going to do this bill, and then immediately gavel out and go caucus. And at the same time, they're talking to each other, trying to figure out what amendments are we going to offer, what amendments are we going to accept, who's voting with me, who's changed their mind. A lot of conversations.
This year, the
All right. Hi, everybody. Chris Barron. I am Director of Communications and Outreach here at the Employment Security Department. We do this media availability monthly following the release of the monthly employment report. So today we released the July. I'm getting my months confused. This is August, but we released the previous month. So we released July's monthly employment report today. You can find that on our homepage at esd.wa.gov. There's the press release itself. And late last week, you saw we also released the projected annual job growth numbers as well. So today I'm joined by our Annalise Van Sherman, our Chief Labor Economist, Paul Turek, Regional Labor Economist for the Central Sound region, which includes King and Pierce counties, and Megan Porter, our Communications Manager for the Labor Market Information and Research Division. So with that, if you have questions after Annalise's opening statement, you can raise your hand or come off mute and we'll get those answered for you. So Annalise, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Overall, looking at the numbers that we just reported for July, it was a good month. Looking at the unemployment rate first, this is a measure of the portion of the workforce that is actively seeking employment. We actually dropped from 5.2% to 5.0%. And this is noteworthy because this is the first time we've seen the unemployment rate drop since 2024. So it's throughout 2025 and 2026, we've been incrementally, very slowly and steadily climbing, plateaued at 5.2% for about 3 months. And this is the first time we've seen a downward shift. So that is one point that is a bright spot in this particular report. Of course, the unemployment rate, we're talking about not only the number of unemployed, but also the labor force. We did see, looking at the size of the number of unemployed, we actually saw a decrease in the number of unemployed. That is what drove that unemployment rate down. But overall, the labor force itself has been contracting in that long run, which is serving to keep that unemployment rate relatively low and steady. Shifting to the monthly numbers, we saw overall a really bright month. We saw the increase of 21,100 jobs. That's our estimated employment increase from June to July on a seasonally adjusted basis. Most industries, in fact, everything except for government and mining and logging, saw month-to-month increases with this preliminary view. So the private sector doing really well in July. The largest increases we saw were private education and health services. This is dominated by health services. Leisure with an increase of 7,300 jobs. Leisure and hospitality coming in second. This is our restaurants, hotels, and entertainment venues, adding 2,700 jobs in July. Retail trade and professional business services adding 2,500 jobs each, and manufacturing coming in with the addition of 2,200 jobs. Those are our high performers over the month. When we take a little bit of a longer run view to see how does this month fit into the overall trend, we do see some shifts taking place. Again, this month we saw the increase of 21,000 jobs, and this is following a revised increase of 9,400 jobs. That's an upward revision, which tells us that what we thought was good last month when we reported it was actually better than we thought last month. So these increases are real. We saw an increase of 9,400 jobs in June, following 10,000 job increase in May. So this is 3 months in a row of increasing employment. Each of those months with fairly strong and increasing strength according to that measure. So overall, looking pretty good. 3 months in a row, it's not bad. When we look at that over the year, though, we have been seeing some shifts overall. Again, July showing a lot of strength across the board. When we look over the year, we do have kind of a mixed story. The industry showing up at the top in terms of high growth would be education and health services. Again, a really large and steady sector for us in Washington, followed by leisure and hospitality, manufacturing, and financial services. So very similar picture to what we saw in terms of what rises to the top when we're looking at a longer run view. When we're looking again at that longer run view, some of the sectors that we're watching closely include professional and business services. It's a very diverse sector that tells us a lot about how the overall economy is doing. These are businesses that serve other businesses. So when we're seeing that year over year drop, that is concerning, but we are starting to see that sector show some signs of health in the last couple months. So that's encouraging. We also saw wholesale and retail trade both showing some weakness over the year, specifically in both of those sectors, really looking at some of our durable goods or larger purchases such as cars. So those are also a couple things to watch that might reflect a little bit of consumer sentiment. Overall, I guess to summarize, pretty good report on when we're looking both at the people side and the jobs side, with the unemployment rate going down for the first time in quite a while, although not very far. It's still just 0.2% below where it was, but that is a different direction than we've been seeing since 2024. And overall, seeing a bright month in terms of month-to-month gains and starting to see some of that stability show up in the over-the-year numbers.
All right, thanks, Annalise. I know we have some media members on here. If you have questions, you can either raise your hand or come off mute and identify yourself and ask your questions. And I know Jerry Cornfield, Washington State Standard, I know you had a few questions you sent in prior, so go ahead. I think you're still on mute. At the upper part of your screen. Sure, I can unmute you myself.
Well, Jerry, I did see the questions you sent, and I remember at least one of them. So I'll just go with what I think you're going to ask, and pertaining to the World Cup. And I do think that that is one of the major stories. When we're looking at the last 3 months of data, we saw leisure and hospitality really rising to the top, really showing up as, the number 1 or number 2 spot in terms of job growth. Leisure and hospitality, again, a sector that when I'm looking at this, I'm overall looking at, a sector that hasn't even reached pre-pandemic levels of employment statewide yet. So this is a sector that we've really been watching, and absolutely when we're looking at the effect of the World Cup, really strong showing. We saw the addition of 4,900 jobs in May, 3,100 in June, 2,700 in July, bringing us to about 10,700 jobs in Washington State in leisure and hospitality, almost all of those in food services and drinking places in particular. I do think that had a lot to do, that the World Cup had a lot to do with that. We'll, of course, see how much that lines up when we look at the August numbers. I know last month I said the July numbers would tell us a lot, but when I look at the calendar, the last game we had in Seattle was on the 6th, which is just before our reference week. So there could still be some lingering employment effects during our reference week. So August is really going to tell us that story about whether our leisure and hospitality increase was a short-lived bubble that tied to sporting events, or if it's something that's longer term and more sustainable. So more to come, but absolutely, I think that we did see that showing up, especially in our restaurants.
Thanks, Annalise. I have Jerry's other two questions. I didn't know, Paul, since you represent King and Pierce County, anything else to add to what Annalise said there?
It's pretty much consistent here. I mean, that's where you're going to see a lot of the, World Cup activity is going to be out of King County. You'll have a little bit of an overdraft in the neighboring counties, but King is where it shows up the most. Comments pretty similar in that, we did see a bump there to transfer over. I mean, the state and King County, the Seattle area, pretty closely tied together economically. And again, is what Annalise said, it always remains to be seen, how things will unfold the next month. Expectations would be such that we'll probably see a little bit of a downturn as some of those jobs get returned back and are no longer needed for the World Cup. So tended to see that occur at the national level. I'm assuming we're going to follow suit, but of course, speculation, we have to wait for the numbers.
Thanks, Paul. Let's see, Jerry's second question was about a link between the launch of walk cares and the health services increase.
So we did see a large increase in health services. When I drew that line, I took a look at what the sector has looked like. And overall, I think what we saw was a little bit of a correction where we've been potentially underreporting a little bit of the employment in professional or in health services, and then kind of seeing that overall correction. As far as a direct link with walk cares, I think it'd be early to be able to make that particular connection. So I'm not willing to make that particular connection at this time. I think that our largest increases were in, just to draw out where those increases were, largest increases were in healthcare, as on the healthcare side, particularly in ambulatory care services, that's our doctor's offices, with also a fairly sizable increase in social assistance. But overall, a pretty steady employment story when we're talking about our health services and our educational services that went through a little bit of a rough patch, but I think we're kind of back onto our regular trajectory there.
Another question in chat. Can you break down government job losses between state and federal and local, and where are high-tech job losses showing?
Sure. Hold on one moment. I'll pull up some data. So looking at the federal story in July, we saw a decrease of 100 jobs, 700 jobs over for state government and 600 for local. So overall, seeing those decreases on that monthly basis. I'm going to pull up another data set if you'll bear with me, because I think that the national or the real story is going to be more embedded in that long-term view. So looking at government employment over the year, we saw 2,000 jobs, a 2,000 job loss from federal government. That's about 2.5% decrease. 2,500 from state, of which about 2,400 of that is from the state government educational system, so our colleges and universities, and about an increase in local government employment of about 3,000. Overall, that increase of 3,000 amounts to less than 1%, 0.78%. So overall, some fairly large numbers, but those large numbers also reflect that the government sector, which includes educational services, is a fairly large sector. So losses at federal and state levels, overall some gains at the local level. The other question looking
And
at
high tech, where are the high tech jobs showing? What losses showing?
Yeah, so high tech shows up in a lot of different sectors. We have been seeing a lot of layoffs, those high profile layoffs that really started showing up in about October 2022. Overall, and I might ask Paul to comment a little bit on this when we with the Seattle area perspective, but overall what we saw with the information sector was a large increase during the early part of the pandemic, kind of cresting in about late 2022, dropping and holding fairly steady since then. But overall, this is a sector that has been high growth for decades. So that is a major shift going from high increases to relatively flat. But we also see some other areas where where high tech employment also shows up. And a lot of that just seems to be kind of flattening out. Year over year, when we're looking at the information sector, we're down 1,100 jobs, or 0.67%. So fairly flat, still declining a little bit, but overall a relatively flat story when we're just looking at this year over year segment. A couple other areas where a lot of high-tech jobs show up. One of those is professional business services, which I mentioned is one that we're watching really closely. That is down 7,900 jobs over the year, which has a great deal of variety, some of those being high-tech. Computer system design and related services is one of those areas that has a lot of tech jobs, and that's a sector or a collection of industries that's down 2,400 over the year, or a little over 3%. Management of companies and enterprises, we have some very high-tech headquarters located in Washington State. That's down 600 over the year, or 0.57%. So some of it's hiding in different places, but overall what I'm seeing is a really high collection of jobs showing up in different industries. Was extremely high growth, kind of shifting to some decline, and overall kind of flattening out. And that's really what I'm seeing in those numbers. Paul, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add. I know a lot of our tech sector is concentrated in the Seattle area.
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, what we've tended to see, at least what I've tended to see in the tech sector, and most of us from monitoring the information industry, is that there's been a lot of information, well, a lot of stories about layoffs and how those have showed up. And for a while, the numbers that we tended to post pretty much would verify that. However, once we got in more information and were able to revise the numbers, what we discovered is that the employment situation really wasn't as dire as it seemed. It is not positive, but it's just not as negative as what we had seen. So what it means is there's been a certain amount of churn in the industry. We hear a lot about layoffs, but we don't really get quite as much information that comes through other than what we see in our employment numbers about hires that are taking place to offset some of those layoffs. So when you put them all together, we still have it down over the year, but if you look at the last few months, we seem to be making a little bit of progress. For King County, it was flat for the month, still down somewhat over the year in total, but as I said, we're starting to see a little bit of an uprise occurring over the 3 months. That also shows up in the state data.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Annalise. Annalise, you have something else to add?
Yeah, and I think that, Paul, that's a really good reminder. We do collect the worker adjustment and retraining notification layoff notices at ESD. they aren't necessarily the same as labor market information, though. So when I'm looking at the WARN notices when they come through, I'm really looking at them with an eye to, there is clearly a story that's happening. What should I be watching for in the news in the next couple weeks, as far as figuring out what that story actually is. Sometimes it's very clear cut. There's a closure, and those jobs are going to show up in our numbers down the line. But frequently there's some shuffling that takes place, and it might not actually come to pass exactly as it's predicted.
Great. Jerry, I think we got all of your questions answered. Anybody else on the call have any questions they would like to ask? And if not, I'll remind folks we do. Oh, Sarah, go ahead.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
We can.
We can.
Great. Yeah, just curious, and I'm sorry if maybe I missed this, but just wanted to get like a general overview. This is a slight decrease in unemployment numbers for the first time in a year and a half. Does it show that like overall, is it enough to give any like bigger picture takeaways in terms of the state's economic health and employment health?
I kind of turn to what we've overall been seeing, because a lot of the time when we're looking forward, it requires a little bit of looking back. And one of the trends that's really been keeping the unemployment rate where it's been, so it's been increasing very slowly and still staying in that 5% range. A lot of that is in response to the labor force itself. So the portion of people who either have a job or are actively seeking employment has been decreasing. Part of this is a result of retirements and aging workforce, as well as a number of other factors that might have people stepping out of the workforce. So, part of it is the number of unemployed, but part of it's also just what's happening under the surface. And that's been keeping the unemployment rate relatively low, just because there's less competition for people that are looking for work. But when I look at that overall trend where we've been slowly increasing, but overall kind of hovering in that 4 to 5% range over the last couple of years, I also look over to the Economic and Revenue Forecast Council to see where we might expect that to go. Forecasts that they've been putting forward have really reflected a similar picture, where there's not a strong expectation of a major increase or decrease in the unemployment rate, really kind of expecting that to hold steady in that general range for the foreseeable future. But overall, the fact that we're seeing it for the first time in a long time turn downward instead of upward is encouraging.
Thank you. All right, thanks. Any other questions? And if not, a reminder that the county numbers are always released after the statewide numbers. Those will be released on August 25th. We'll have August's monthly employment numbers in mid-September, so about a month from now. I think it's September 16th is the date on that release. So we'll have August numbers. Maybe that gives us kind of a more even complete picture of the World Cup employment and the numbers and what happened there. But otherwise, if there's no more questions, we appreciate your time. Thanks, Annalise, Paul, Megan, and thank you all for attending. And if you have any other further follow-ups, you can always email us at the media inbox. You all know where it is. So thanks. Have a great day. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.